Hello, and welcome to the final episode of Coup Save America for our third season. Today, we're going to tackle one of the most damaging myths in American culture, the myth of rugged individualism. It's a story that we've been told again and again, that the ideal American is a self-reliant lone wolf, pulling themselves up by their bootstraps, needing no help, and succeeding entirely on their own. This myth is central to how we think about ourselves, our nation, and our economy. But here's the problem. It's largely a lie. It's a lie that has justified decades of economic inequality, the erosion of social safety nets, and a society where the rich grow richer while everyone else struggles just to get by. Remember, 66% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. And at the heart of this lie is one of its most vocal and influential champions, Ayn Rand. Rand's philosophy of objectivism glorifies selfishness and condemns altruism. Her ideas have been embraced by billionaires, corporate leaders, and politicians as a justification for their greed and indifference to the suffering of so many others. But today, we're going to confront this myth head on. We're going to dissect Rand's philosophy, challenge the assumptions underlying rugged individualism, and make the case for a more collective mindset, one that focuses on the common good. We'll explore the lessons of history, the evidence from science, and the examples of other nations that have rejected this toxic ideology in favor of something that is far better. First, let's start with Ayn Rand herself. Rand's novels, Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead, are often held up as the sacred text of rugged individualism. Her philosophy, Objectivism, is built around the idea that the pursuit of one's own happiness is the highest moral calling, and that altruism is a moral failing. She famously wrote once, "Every man is an end in himself, not the means to the ends of others." In Rand's worldview, compassion is weakness, and selfishness is not just a virtue, it's the ultimate virtue. Her heroes are the so-called producers, individuals who succeed through their own merit, brilliance, and determination. Her villains, anyone who dares to advocate for collective welfare, be they government officials, union leaders, or even ordinary citizens who believe in helping their neighbors. Rand's philosophy provides an intellectual veneer for greed and exploitation, a moral justification for saying, hey, I've got mine, so to hell with you. But what kind of society does this philosophy create? A society where the strong exploit the weak? Where the wealthy hoard resources while the poor suffer? Where basic human needs like healthcare and education are treated as privileges rather than rights? Friends, this doesn't seem like freedom to me. It seems more like a dystopia. Rand's philosophy is not just morally bankrupt, it's also deeply flawed. It misunderstands human nature, ignores history, and runs contrary to the evidence of how societies actually thrive. For most of human history, we survived not as isolated individuals, but as a cooperative group. Anthropologists and evolutionary biologists agree that mutual aid, sharing, and social bonds have been the keys to our collective survival. Remember, for roughly 95% of our history as a species, humans have lived as hunter-gatherers. In these societies, resources were shared, decisions were made collectively, and success was measured by the well-being of the group, not the individual. Studies of modern hunter-gatherer societies, such as those conducted by anthropologist Richard Lee, confirm this. These societies prioritize egalitarianism, reciprocity, and mutual support. It's not survival of the fittest, it's survival of the most cooperative. This emphasis on cooperation isn't just a relic of our past. It is deeply ingrained in who we are as a species. A 2016 study in Nature, the world's leading multidisciplinary science journal, found that groups that cooperate tend to outperform those that don't, both in terms of overall survival and resource acquisition. Likewise, a 2021 study in the Science Advances journal showed that altruistic behavior strengthens group cohesion and resilience, especially in times of crises. Rand's philosophy asks us to reject this part of ourselves. It tells us to see our neighbors as competitors, not allies, and to measure our worth by how much we can accumulate rather than how much we can contribute. Rand's glorification of the self-made man is equally flawed. No one, after all, achieves success in isolation. Every entrepreneur, inventor, or artist stands on the shoulders of those who came before them. Steve Jobs, for example, who is often cited as a model of rugged individualism, didn't invent the microchip, the internet, or the touchscreen. No, these were the results of decades of publicly funded research and collective innovation. Even Rand herself benefited from the very systems she disdained. In her later years, she received Social Security and Medicare benefits. The irony is a bit hard to ignore. The elevation of rugged individualism to a moral ideal has had devastating consequences for American society. It has exacerbated four major social problems that we frequently discuss on this program. First, of course, there is income inequality. According to a 2022 report by the World Inequality Lab, the top 1% of Americans now control nearly 33% of the nation's wealth, while the bottom 50% hold just 2%. This level of inequality is not a sign of meritocracy. It's a symptom of a rigged system. Next, we have America's healthcare crisis. The United States spends more on healthcare per capita than any other nation, yet ranks only 35th in life expectancy. Meanwhile, millions of Americans are uninsured or underinsured, and medical debt remains the leading cause of bankruptcy in America. This is the result of treating healthcare as a commodity rather than a human right. And to keep the poor exactly where they belong, access to quality education in the United States is often determined purely by one's zip code. Meanwhile, student debt has surpassed $1.7 trillion, burdening an entire generation and stifling their potential. Finally, emphasis on individualism has also hindered our ability to address collective challenges like global warming. Individual actions like recycling are, of course, important, but systemic change requires collective action, something that rugged individualism fundamentally opposes. Reliance on rugged individualism also justifies ecological regulations and policies that prioritize the wealthy few at the expense of everyone else. Ayn Rand's work, while celebrated by some for its unapologetic championing of individualism and unregulated capitalism, has faced intense criticism from leading intellectuals across multiple disciplines. Her philosophy, Objectivism, is often dismissed as overly simplistic, morally impoverished, and disconnected from the complexities of human societies. Perhaps one of the sharpest critiques comes from the late economist and intellectual John Kenneth Galbraith, who once described Rand's philosophy as, quote, paranoia on paper, end quote. Galbraith argues that Rand's dystopian portrayal of government and her idealization of the wealthy elite lacks nuance and reflects a fear of societal collaboration, rather than an understanding of its necessity. Galbraith saw her work not as a roadmap to prosperity, but as a justification for greed cloaked in pseudo-philosophical rhetoric. Philosopher Alasdair MacIntyre also critiqued Rand's objectivism for its profound lack of moral depth. In his works on ethics and virtue, MacIntyre argued that Rand's philosophy reduces human relationships to mere transactions. Objectivism, he pointed out, ignores the moral obligations that bind communities and dismisses concepts like compassion, altruism, and collective responsibility as weaknesses rather than strengths. MacIntyre saw this transactional view as antithetical to the human condition, which of course thrives on social bonds and mutual support. Rand's portrayal of humanity as driven solely by self-interest has also been debunked by behavioral economics. Researchers like Dan Ariely have provided empirical evidence demonstrating that people are not purely self-interested. In his book, Predictably Irrational, Ariely shows that humans consistently act in ways that balance self-interest with fairness and cooperation. For example, Ariely's experiments on the ultimatum game reveal that people are willing to sacrifice their own financial gain to ensure fairness. In the game, one participant is given a sum of money and must propose how to divide it with another person. Now, if the second participant deems the offer unfair, they can reject it, and neither participant receives a thing. Ariely found that most people are willing to reject offers they perceive as unjust, even at their own expense, a finding that flies in the face of Rand's belief in selfish rationality. These studies highlight a fundamental flaw in objectivism. It fails to account for the social and emotional dimensions of human behavior. People do not operate as isolated islands of self-interest. They are deeply influenced by social norms, empathy, and a desire for reciprocity. Perhaps one of the most damning critiques of the individualistic ethos comes from sociologist Robert Putnam, whose landmark book, Bowling Alone, The Collapse and Revival of American Community, examines the decline of social capital in the United States. Putnam defines social capital as the networks of relationships, trust, and norms that facilitate collective action for mutual benefit. He argues that the erosion of these bonds, caused in part by the rise of individualism, has led to a society that is less healthy, less happy, and less resilient. Putnam's research shows that strong social bonds are crucial for societal well-being. Communities with high levels of social capital enjoy lower crime rates, better health outcomes, and greater economic stability. Conversely, when social bonds erode, well, people become more isolated, distrustful, and vulnerable to economic and political shocks. The individualistic ethos championed by Rand runs counter to these findings. By glorifying self-interest and dismissing collective responsibility, Rand's philosophy contributes to the very problems Putnam identifies: loneliness, alienation, and a lack of communal support. In addition to Galbraith, McIntyre, Airlie, and Putnam, numerous other thinkers have critiqued Rand's ideas. Economists like Paul Krugman have highlighted the economic inequality and social instability that arise from policies inspired by Randian ideals. Historians like Jill Lepore have contextualized Rand's work as a reactionary response to the New Deal and the rise of social safety nets, an attempt to turn back the clock to an era of unrestrained capitalism. Even within the literary world, Rand's work has faced ridicule. Gore Vidal famously called Atlas Shrugged nearly perfect in its immorality and derided its worldview as cruel and reductive. The overwhelming consensus among philosophers, economists, social scientists, and even many literary critics is that Ayn Rand's philosophy is deeply flawed. It misrepresents human nature, undervalues the importance of community, and promotes an ideology that serves the interests of the powerful few while harming the most vulnerable. In a world that is increasingly interconnected and interdependent, Rand's vision of isolated, self-interested individuals is not just outdated, it's in some ways outright dangerous. If rugged individualism is not the answer, what is? Well, the evidence suggests a compelling alternative: the Nordic model. Denmark, Sweden, Finland, and Norway have built societies that prioritize collective responsibility, equity, and the common good over the myth of the self-made individual. And here's the key point: it seems to be working. The Nordic countries consistently rank at the very top of global indices measuring happiness, equality, and quality of life. According to the World Happiness Report in 2023, Finland has been crowned the happiest country in the world for 6 consecutive years. Following closely behind are other Nordic nations like Denmark, Iceland, and Sweden. What makes these countries so successful? Well, it's their embrace of policies that balance individual freedom with collective welfare, ensuring that no one is left behind. One of the pillars of the Nordic model is, of course, universal healthcare. In these countries, healthcare is treated as a fundamental right, not a privilege reserved for those who can afford it. This approach has led to better health outcomes and lower healthcare costs compared to countries like, you guessed it, the United States. Take Finland as an example. Life expectancy in Finland is 82.4 years, compared to only 77.3 years in the United States. And this gap is not due to genetics or climate. It is the direct result of a healthcare system that focuses on prevention, accessibility, and equity. In contrast, the United States spends more on healthcare per capita than any other country, yet leaves millions uninsured or underinsured. The result is a system that prioritizes profit over people, a stark contrast to the Nordic approach. Education is yet another area where the Nordic model shines. In Finland, education is free at all levels, from preschool all the way to university. This policy ensures that every child, regardless of their family's income, has access to high-quality education and the opportunities to succeed in society. But here's the thing: it's not just about affordability. It's also about respect for educators. Teachers in Finland are highly trained, well compensated, and given significant autonomy in their classrooms. This respect translates into better outcomes for students. Finnish students consistently outperform their peers in the international assessments, not because they spend more time in the classroom, but because the system emphasizes equity, creativity, and here's the thing: critical thinking. Compare this to the United States, where public education is often underfunded, access to higher education comes with a mountain of debt, and teachers are undervalued and underpaid. The Nordic countries also lead the world in gender equality. According to the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Report, Iceland, Finland, Norway, and Sweden consistently occupy the top spots. Policies such as paid parental leave, subsidized childcare, and strong protections against workplace discrimination ensure that women have equal opportunities to thrive in both their professional and personal lives. And gender equality isn't just a moral imperative, it's also an economic one. Research from McKinsey and Company shows that countries with the greatest gender equality see higher levels of economic growth and innovation. The Nordic countries are proof of this, boasting some of the highest GDPs per capita in the world. Another cornerstone of the Nordic model is its strong commitment to worker protections. In these countries, labor unions are powerful and play a central role in negotiating wages and working conditions. This collective bargaining ensures that workers receive fair pay, reasonable hours, and safe working environments. Again, contrast this with the United States, where union membership has been in steady decline for many decades. And workers are often at the mercy of exploitive employers. The result is a workforce that is overworked, underpaid, and increasingly insecure. The Nordic countries are also global leaders in environmental sustainability. They understand that addressing global warming requires collective action and systemic change, not just individual efforts. Denmark, for instance, generates nearly half of its electricity from wind power and aims to become carbon neutral by 2050. Sweden has implemented policies to phase out fossil fuels, while Norway is leading the charge in electric vehicle adoption. These initiatives are not just about protecting the planet. They're about ensuring a livable future for everyone. And they show what's possible when governments prioritize the common good over short-term profits. The overall outcomes of the Nordic model are, in many ways, undeniable. These countries have some of the lowest levels of income inequality in the world, as measured by the Gini coefficient. They also boast higher levels of social mobility, meaning that a person's economic future is not solely determined by their family's wealth. However, well-being extends beyond economic measures. Nordic citizens report higher levels of trust in their governments and institutions, a stark contrast to the widespread cynicism and polarization seen in countries like the United States. Trust, after all, is a critical component of social cohesion, and it enables societies to tackle complex challenges together. Moreover, these countries rank among the most innovative in the world. According to the Global Innovation Index, Sweden, Finland, and Denmark constantly place in the top 10. This innovation is driven not by rugged individualism, but by a collective investment in education, research, and infrastructure. The success of the Nordic countries offers valuable lessons for the United States. First, we must recognize that individual freedom and collective welfare are not mutually exclusive. In fact, they are mutually reinforcing. By ensuring that everyone has access to healthcare, education, and a clean environment, we create the conditions for true freedom. The freedom to pursue one's goals without the constant specter of financial ruin. Second, we must invest in social safety nets and public goods. These investments pay dividends in the form of healthier, happier, and more productive citizens. The Nordic model shows that these policies are not only morally just, but they are also economically efficient. And finally, we must reject the false economy of individualism versus collectivism. The Nordic countries are not socialist in the same sense that is often used in American politics. They are capitalist economies that have simply chosen to temper market forces with policies that prioritize the common good. This balance has allowed them to achieve prosperity and equity, proving that it's possible to have both. It's time for America to abandon the myth of rugged individualism and embrace a new narrative, one that values cooperation, empathy, and shared responsibility. Ayn Rand's philosophy may appeal to the wealthy and powerful few, but it offers little to nothing to the millions of Americans struggling to make ends meet. Friends, let's rewrite the American story. Let's build a society that reflects the best of who we are, a species that thrives not through selfishness, but through solidarity. This is Sean Sainhart, and this has been The Last Word Up Front, and I want to welcome you to the very last episode of Crusade America for Season 3. My guest today may very well disagree with everything that I have just said, and you know what? That's okay. Damien Dubose is the author of the book, America's Ethical Archetype, Establishing the Psychology of Moral Authority in Modern Politics. In this debut and fascinating book, Damien leverages his extensive analytical expertise to explore ethics through an interdisciplinary approach, integrating insights from both psychology and philosophy. Damien's work advocates for profound transformations in government and education, aiming to ignite a national dialogue on ethical leadership and political integrity. And you know what? This missive sounds very much like the ideas for change that we promote on this show. So let's see if Damien and I can find some common ground. We're going to be right back to find out after the break. My guest today is a Washington, D.C. based financial professional with roots in Baltimore, Maryland. Damien Dubose is a certified financial planning and analyst professional and holds a bachelor's degree in business finance as well as an MBA from the University of Baltimore Townsend University Joint Program. Damien has organized and led community groups themed around Jungian personality types for several years, fostering relationships and discussions on psychological insights. He is positioned as a pivotal voice for sustainable change in America. And if I can get my producer to please bring up the cover of Damien's book. There we go. America's Ethical Archetype, Establishing the Psychology of Moral Authority and Modern Politics, explores the foundational principles that define America's identity, focusing on the intersection of psychology, ethics, and politics. The book discusses how establishing a clear standard of moral authority, where one's ideas are seen as the proper benchmarks for good and bad, is essential in navigating political challenges. It argues that our intellectual understanding of concepts is the source of all meaning and value, making it crucial to adopt a reasoned, individual-focused approach to ethics and governance. By challenging current norms, the book advocates for a renewed commitment to individual rights and principled leadership. And now, let's bring in Damien Dubose to explain what all of this means. Damien, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Sean. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Good, good.
You getting ready for Thanksgiving?
Absolutely. Definitely.
Absolutely. So I read your book and found it absolutely fascinating. Now, I do disagree with some of the core principles, but nonetheless, I wanted to have this conversation because I think it's important. First, I kind of wanted to ask you a very simple question, and that is, what inspired you to write America's Ethical Archetype, and why now, right? Why in this time?
Okay. I guess for me, I'm a lifelong learner, and do a lot of reading / listening, and been involved with, I guess, philosophical, maybe self-development material for a while. And at some point, I can detect patterns fairly well as well. So I started to detect a similar pattern in a lot of things that I was reading. And then I just happened to come across two books that not just books, but philosophies and ways of thought that I thought, kind of illuminated everything that I was seeing in like the political sphere, what's happening within the culture, the results of it, the mentality of people that, I'm encountering. And so this became sort of, I don't want to call it a calling, but it's just something that I felt that I had to do to write what I perceived to be happening or at the base of what's going on.
The book is fascinating in so many ways, and I can tell that you spent, how long did it take you to write the book? Because it is very in-depth and intellectual.
Thank you. 2 years. It took some
2 years. Wow.
Yep.
I would have actually guessed it took a lot longer, given the amount of research that you engaged in.
I mean, it was just something that I wanted to invest in. It was a compulsion. So it just was calling me to write it every day. And I wanted to make sure that I finished and got my ideas laid out in a way that, fully integrated way to my belief. And so I just put that effort in and try to get it out there.
Well, I want to thank you for putting in the effort because, again, even though I disagree with some of the fundamental aspects of the book, I appreciate the work that you put into it, and I appreciate the nuance that you gave to it. And I actually agree with quite a bit that was in the book, which leads me to my next question. How do you define moral authority, and why is that so critical in modern politics?
Okay. So I guess I want to level set just a little bit. When I speak, I really in the book I really speak from an American standpoint, and just like you mentioned in the lead up, Ayn Rand is a system of thought that I used as a tool to bring out the ideas in this book, and the other character in the book is Carl Jung, and so the reason I brought in the psychological ideas from Carl Jung is I felt that it brought in a lot of nuance to understanding people's different approaches to what I would call quote unquote reason. Um, and so what he highlights is that a lot of times people are talking and that we're talking past each other because we're actually thinking about different things. And that's why I wanted to bring that aspect into the conversation. But with that said, even though I wanted to bring that understanding of different people's mentalities, I also wanted to say that, yes, that may exist, but this is not conducive to the system that we have in America. So that's how I come to that part right there.
And what problems do you see in America today, and where are they rooted in your opinion?
So I guess, in my opinion, to say it succinctly, is we have a system that is rooted in individualism, and I feel that we are getting away from that. And so, in the collect, also to me, there's a collective approach that you can take, and there's an individualistic approach that you can take. And these things are antithetical. So they can't coexist at all. And so, if we're having debates about which one, which method should we choose to set the path forward for our ideas in America, yes, we're going to definitely clash because these two things cannot be mixed. So that's the part of, setting the psychology of moral authority and correcting the country's broken politics, because we need to set the foundation, in my opinion, and that's what I say in the book, set the foundation, because they can't be both. It's one or the other, and then set a path forward after that.
Now, why do you think that individualism and collectivism are incompatible?
Because it's about an approach. It's a method. It's a method of approach. Which comes first? Does the individual come first and the collective come, secondary, or does the collective come first and the individual takes a back seat? Because, I think I agree with you in the beginning. These things aren't necessarily separate, and there are going to be some things that I definitely disagree about from Ayn Rand's your take on Ayn Rand, but these things are not separate. They do coexist, but there's a definite priority when it comes to an individual. And I'm saying that the individualistic approach definitely supersedes the collective results, what I would call it.
Can you explain the individualistic approach that you talk about?
So to make it most simple, it's your conscious intention or your conscious or personal understanding of ideas. So I always want things to make sense to me. When I'm making a decision, I always want to take all the information, and make a decision that's true to me. And it doesn't mean that I'm going to ignore any facts or anything like that. What I'm saying is that I have to create my own meaning. Things have to mean something to me for them to aid to my fulfillment in life. And so that's what I mean by taking an individualistic approach, because as we probably and hopefully will get to, is that within the psychological approach to some of the Jung's ideas, what he introduces is that there's what he calls a collective unconscious, where I would call it, or say it's similar to rule following, whereas, okay, someone else has said something and we aspire to this ideal without our own personal understanding of this ideal, or what benefits us from this ideal that people are put forth.
And I actually agree with that point in the book. I do think that we have a problem with what's called groupthink in this country. And to be fair, not just in the country, but the world in general. And I do think that has led us to a very dangerous path where, and again, this is one of the reasons why I wanted to have this conversation, because even though we fundamentally disagree on many of the issues, I do think that I mean, the worst thing that you can do in America right now is disagree with the common consensus.
I agree. I mean,
You get
yes,
canceled, you'll get attacked,
right,
and
true.
it's led to a society where we cannot speak our mind, we cannot have individual ideas, we cannot think independently. Um, and I think that that's a huge problem that has set us back and has led to the polarization that we see in the country.
True.
Um,
I agree.
and I just kind of wanted to get your thoughts on that, if you can elaborate on where you see that as a problem.
Yes, I mean, I do see that as a problem. The idea of, I guess, canceling people out. I have and I wrote about that in the book, I think, a little bit. And just, I think it's my job as an individual to speak my mind and not be worried about, I don't want to face violence or anything.
Right.
But if someone disagrees, I can't be concerned about their disagreement, and there's going to be disagreement, and I have to be strong enough, mentally strong enough to get through that. So canceling people, like I said, it's not something that I, I think that I focus on a lot. But the groupthink aspect, yes, I wanted to just take it from the groupthink aspect, just because I think Jung brings a lot more context to it when he talks about the collective identity, and I'm using, like I said, I'm using Jung's approach and I'm using Rand's approach to get their insights. And so what he brings in is the whole idea of the collective mentality is a primitive mentality. That's where we came from, and therefore, and there was no idea of an individual in collective, I mean, human groups. And so what we've done from over history is develop an idea of the individual. And what that comes with is seeing differences, not just agreeing or having no idea that there are different beliefs or thoughts within the group moving as one. So just developing into an individual. And so this is the part that I'm seeing that's the detriment in American society, is that we simply just aren't developing individuals.
Right. And I also agree in your book about the education system in America, the focus on rote memorization, that collective mindset again, where you have to kind of just agree. I mean, we're not training individual thinkers. We're not training people to think independently at all.
Right.
And I think that has had huge detriments in our society.
Absolutely.
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
because I mean, once again, I'm glad that we can find parts that we can agree on. But it seems to be that that's just like we have a lot of, I don't know, we'll call it angst, but this is true, and then it's just not helping us to raise newer generations of people who can actually fix our problems. And when I say fix our problems, I don't mean for our sake, for their own. And so me even saying that statement is kind of speaking to, I think, the disagreements that we may have, is because I think that people solve our problems by pursuing their values. And that's what when I think about a business owner or anyone who develops a new technology, they are pursuing their goal, and I get to benefit as a result.
Right. And there's some truth to that. I don't disagree with that at all, that perspective. I think that the problem that I have comes from the exploitation aspect of that.
Okay.
Like with the level of inequality that we have in not just in this country, in the world, but we definitely have a problem in this country with income inequality, with exploitation, with corruption, especially in government. And when I say corruption, I'm talking about both political parties.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, so to your first point, so one of the points that I think that I'm trying to make in the book is that it is your job, if you're developing individuals, you're raising people to say it's your job to make decisions. And one of the things that I think that I'm seeing is that because we've done nothing to help people understand that explicitly from childhood up to an adult, that they don't even know that it's their job to make decisions. And so I think when you mix people who haven't developed their own personal decision making with people who are making decisions for themselves, I think the result that you get is what some people may call exploitation. Because you've got some people who are making decisions dealing with people who don't even know that this is what what they need to be doing for themselves. And so we just get these relationships where it's hard. Like, I can't tell you what's good for you. You have to make that decision for yourself. And so if you take a deal, if you sign a contract and I sign it with you, I'm assuming that this is a win-win contract. And if you take that contract and you say these terms are not good enough for me later, then for me as a person who lives by intention, I'm thinking, well, this is your decision. This was your choice. You chose this. This is your decision. So why are we having this disconnect? But I think that that's what leads to a lot of this idea of taking advantage of people, because people didn't necessarily put forth the effort to make personal decisions on their own behalf.
Well, but a lot of people too don't have the decision-making capacity for whatever reasons. It could be a lack of education. It could be personal disabilities. It could be, I mean, there are all these factors that contribute to one's ability to make decisions that are in their best interests. Would you agree with that?
I would say that may be the case, but this speaks to my point that we should be explicitly helping people, especially children, develop to that point, because there is no alternative, in my opinion. And I think this probably is going to speak to our opinions on individualism versus collectivism, because there is no alternative to this other than, I guess, a collective alternative. I don't see that as an ideal to pursue. I don't see because there's a lot of assumptions being made. If an adult grows up and they don't, like you're saying, they don't have the capacity to make their own choices and decisions very well, I don't know if that's a result of us never helping them to develop that, or is that something that they literally couldn't do for themselves? Because I don't find it to be the case. When I'm talking to people all across the country, I mean, all different education levels, socioeconomical backgrounds, I mean, I don't see a lot of people who cannot make decisions, or they can, but they're limiting capacity. I guess multiple levels that people come in at. But I think if you just allow people to make choices for themselves and not baby them, then they can do that. But if there's never an expectation, then that's like a muscle. If you don't use it, it's going to atrophy, your own decision-making capabilities.
Well, I guess what I'm getting at is that some people don't have the same opportunities as other people when it comes to the decisions that they can make. For instance, someone who's been impoverished, who doesn't have the same educational access, the same healthcare opportunities, the same, general opportunities in society to make decisions that are in their self-interest.
I mean, I understand what you're saying, but I guess my question would then be, what in reality can we do about that? I mean, an individual may say, take an opportunity to help a person, but because the only alternative argument could be, well, we can compel others to contribute, and mostly financially, to this person's development, which I don't think that is it's a moral argument. I think that's an immoral argument. But if I were to choose to say, okay, I know this person, and I see that they may lack something that I can help them develop, then that's a part of my life. That's a part of my experience. I actually get a benefit by helping. If I'm invested, I'll actually get an emotional benefit from it, from interacting with this person and helping them develop. But if I'm doing that from afar, if I'm just contributing to a system, throwing money into the government, and hopefully that the dollar gets to this person, and there's no face on that dollar and there's no one to answer to, then I just don't see that as a viable system. Well, Yes, I don't see that as a viable system and a viable approach to handling problems.
So, what is your philosophy on programs like Medicare and Social Security and the social safety nets that I discussed in the monologue? Are you against those programs?
In principle, yes. Yes. And I know there are going to be a lot of people who know me who would say that, this is, why would you say that? But I mean, in principle, yes. Give the people, don't take the money from the people in the first place. Don't take the money from the people in the first place. And there is going to be some growing pains with this because people are going to have to develop the ability to make long-term choices in their own lives. They're going to have to see that, okay, it doesn't work out to spend all your money as a child. You will have to save up some money and you'll have to interact with each other in different ways. I mean, we're building a long view picture. I guess what I'm building a long view picture right now, but this is just going to be a learning curve. You're going to have to kind of relearn, and you're going to get better because you're going to have to make these decisions, these hard life decisions with long term thinking.
So, how there's approximately somewhere around 70 million people who receive Social Security benefits.
Okay.
This is retired people, people that are disabled, survivors, et cetera. A lot of these people absolutely depend on Social Security to live. They don't have any other alternatives. What are they to do if these systems go away?
So I guess first of all, I'll put out that I don't necessarily deal with the systems in my book, but I
Correct.
will try to answer this question right here. When I say get rid of them, to me, I'm looking at it as more of a phase out. And this is just off of the top of my head right now, because there are people who have paid in, and I think that if you paid in under the assumption that it was going to come back to. I probably wouldn't delve too deeply into those ideas because I think we have people who expertly, I don't know, maybe actuarial science or mathematics or something like that, that can actually, see how these situations and scenarios play out. But to me, phase out makes the most sense to try to put a halt on the pay in and, phase out what's going out. But in principle and in theory, that's how I would approach it, just on a moral basis.
Right, but what I'm getting at is so for the people that depend on these programs, if we were to get rid of them, I mean, a lot of them would die.
So I think so. I guess one of the things, in my opinion, that when we start taking a focus away from obtaining resources from government, in my mind, this is kind of comes out in the book, but not all the way. There becomes this reconnection with your immediate environment and family, social equity with people who you actually know, actual people who you deal with, family, community, your local area. Those are those relationships. If you're not taking the resources, extracting the resources from those communities, from those people, from those individuals, then those resources still exist for people to share if they need to, help their friends when they need to, help the people that they know when they need to. So I just think in all, it's just a more efficient, more effective way of handling it and a more moral way of handling it.
What about how does that apply to things like the military, the police, the fire departments, things that are collective in nature? Would we get rid of those as well?
No, definitely. I'm not. I mean, I'm as a person who, and I'll just speak for myself, and I would hope there would be others. As a person who sees a benefit in law enforcement and military defense, I'm perfectly willing to contribute to those things, for my safety, for my personal safety, and then I don't. I would. I'm led to believe that there are other people who understand the usefulness and the the how their lives have been benefited by these groups and organizations or agencies that we have. to where as though they will be willing to fund these agencies. So I
But
don't
do
see
you
no
not
issue
think
there.
that you also benefit from programs like Social Security and Medicare that enable things like public health, public safety, things that do benefit our society, much like the military does?
So what I would say, I think they're fundamentally different. Just because when I say that the programs can go away, it doesn't mean that that action goes away from our society. It just means that that action is properly placed with the people who interact with those people who have in those situations, as far as disability, and things of that nature. So I'm not saying that no one would attend to those things. I'm just saying that a government means to attend to those situations in society is just not the way to go about it.
Okay. What about dealing with problems like global warming?
Once again, I'll say I don't deal with this in the book necessarily, but I dealing with global warming. It's just I think what we just have to start with is starting from an individual standpoint. Like you can't force me to adopt your understanding of what global warming is, how big of a problem it is. Um, if it is, let me make my decision and approach it the way that I need to approach it. And if if I make the wrong decision, then it's to my detriment. It's I mean, because I don't see the other alternative. I don't think that just ignoring quote unquote global warming is a good thing. I mean, if there's a detriment to me as a person because the earth is warming at a clip, then yeah, I would want to attend to that. But what other alternative is there? Are you going to force me to contribute to I mean to I don't know, fund it, or I guess what is the alternative here? Can I make my own decision, or are you going to coerce me to to fund the I don't know how we would even address it, to be honest with you.
Right. But I mean, you do agree that there are problems that are collective in nature that require a coordinated response.
I think that's fine. I just think that it should always be with a person's full intent. Like, we are both here on this show. And I have my full intent. You have your full conscious intent. And I guess we're saying we're collectively doing the show. But I always want my point in the book is to say that always have it be your conscious intent of everything you're doing, because that's your purpose and you're pursuing it. You want to pursue it consciously. And it doesn't mean that you're not doing it with another person. It just means that you have full awareness of what you're doing. And then that gives you a better, in my opinion, it gives you a better
Right.
life because it gives you meaning.
Can you explain how your book challenges the traditional norms that are established in American politics?
Wow. So I guess one, and this is not really new, is I don't look at it from a right, left, or Republican, Democratic perspective. And you can probably say that that's a Randian take on it. It's just more of a collectivist versus, individualist standpoint. Um, so, and I don't think that you can find an individualistic standpoint, excuse me, in American politics today. I don't know if it exists. So that's one area. And I think that's the most important area. So this is what I kind of just am quote unquote fighting for within the book, is just to take that individualistic approach, to set that foundation of individualism, to say, no, this is what we're pursuing. This is either collectivism or individualism. And no, we're not ever going to pursue collectivism. We're going to pursue balancing collective goals with individualism and not the other way around.
And how do you incorporate objectivist philosophy into your framework for ethical governance? What would that look like?
So I guess to take apart from the book, I guess quickly to kind of recap what I do in the book is I just take a lot of material from objectivist philosophy and Ayn Rand and her cohorts, and juxtapose that with Carl Jung to give it some nuance and context from a psychological standpoint. And I don't know that I'm saying much different than what she says. So I'm not here necessarily to defend her or to raise her up or anything like that. Not, I'm just taking that as a tool and a means to get to an end. And I just think that she was right on the idea that, yes, the individual approach to life is the proper one, because as a human, there are things that you have to do for yourself to continue your survival, and so it starts with you. So I just don't think that you can conceive of a proper ethics. You don't really have full meaning when you're not looking at things from an individualistic standpoint. You don't have full context. You don't actually, and I think also what it does is it destroys the whole idea of, being ethical, being moral, because you're not attaching these collective decisions. You're not tracing them back to your personal life. As an example, people will put these ideals out there and they'll say, shouldn't we do this? Shouldn't we do that? And immediately, anytime I say, shouldn't we do this? I'm immediately tying that back to my personal responsibility in doing this. So I'm always expecting anyone who wants to promote these collective ideals, I always expect them to say, hey, I want to do X, and I'm starting with my resources, my time. I'm going to go do it. Would you like to join me? But politically, we don't really hear that. We more hear that, hey, I would like to take your resources that you work hard for, tax it, take it, and do what whoever says we should do with it, which I just think is fundamentally wrong.
Well, I do agree that a lot of our government is wasteful. A lot of our government is incompetent in many ways. And again, I go back to the corruption that exists in wholesale, where a lot of that waste occurs. Do you kind of agree with that sentiment?
I do, but I believe that it's our fault. By promoting, for lack of a better word, the collective approach, you create these avenues for corruption to seep in. I mean, I know personally of people that government contract. I've been in government contracting. I know how it works, the ins and outs. I know that there are thresholds to hit. So I know I can hit a percentage of, my expectation to get the full amount, or which percentage I need to hit to get the full amount, and how to take advantage. And I would say that I don't put that on people that take an advantage piece, because I would put that on the system itself. I just think that the system is flawed by approaching politics or government the way that we approach it. We have let these avenues exist where people are going to take advantage. I mean, I saw a story most recently. I don't know how many. It's a lot of PPP money. Somebody was just locked up. She was a host in Arizona. It took I don't know, more than millions of dollars in PPP money, fraudulently. But just the whole idea of having these programs that are easily, taken advantage of, just because you care or just because you believe it should work. And it's just fundamental. That's why in my book I'm saying that we need better leaders. We need intellectual leaders. We need people who think about these things for first and foremost. And a person with an individualistic mindset will understand how these things interconnect, how they integrate, instead of someone who's just caring deeply and saying, well, it was good enough. The ends justify the means. At least we're doing something. That's not an approach. That's not an intellectual approach to handling these problems.
What do you think the main problem within our political system is? I mean, we have the polarization that comes, which again has destroyed our country. I mean, as a leftist, I'm not supposed to have any conversations with conservatives or anybody that's on the right. I will be lashed probably for having this conversation with you, and I don't care because I want to
That's
have
good.
this conversation with you.
Thank you.
But we are so polarized in this country. And a lot of that comes from our politicians who, I mean, we've got this hatred of each other now where you have to hate your neighbor just because they think differently than you. Which I
Yeah.
guess gets to my question: how does America's current political landscape reflect the abandonment of individualism?
I'm, I would think, I think that individuals, so kind of want to bite my tongue when I'm saying this, but I would say that individuals should should be open to hearing counterpoints or different points of view. But a collective mentality, as I go through in the book, can't conceive of a mentality outside different from their own mentality
Right.
because only thing they perceive, only thing they can do is project. And this is straight from Jung. Like I'm not a psychologist. I'm just taking, the information that I'm getting from these two systems of thought, and that this is specifically his take on it. It's just that a collective mentality cannot perceive of a I guess a mentality different from its own because all it can do is project. And so that to me is evidence of how we're not developing individuals because, oh, I don't want to hear another person's argument. How could you even have a different argument? Well, to me, that harkens back to these primitive ideals that I'm talking about in the book. Well, not ideals, but primitive tendencies from the old collective mentality. So this is another reason why I want to pursue, and not just pursue, but explicitly set that foundation. Like, no, this is a country for individuals. We're developing individuals. This is the goal. This is the gold standard to be an individual. This is explicitly what we're doing. And to me, just setting that foundation in itself, I try to keep it as simple as possible. Just setting that foundation in and of itself sets the goal, sets the path, or sets it's the mission statement. It keeps us on track on where we're going, and it just will slowly start to fix a lot of these ills that we see as far as the polarization and the disconnect.
Right. What are the risks of collectivist trends overtaking individual focused ethics in America from your perspective?
Wow, the risks. I mean, I think we've discussed most of them. I think I think we're there. And so I guess I'll talk about a different point, kind of like what I see. Because as we introduce more and more technology, because I think technology is shrinking the globe, and I think most people would agree with that.
Yes.
But with that and how fast it's coming out, is that we need better ideas because as things are changing so quickly, without that individual, I guess, approach that people were limited to as we were coming through the older times, I guess, before, before television, before telephone, or before the internet, you had to actually make these decisions with actual people. And now we've just got technology, and there can just be this overwhelming feeling of, this is what everyone thinks. You know, the media, we can leverage a video or a meme, and it can evoke an idea in a person to think, oh, this is what everyone thinks. This is how everything works, instead of approaching it from an individualistic standpoint. And so to me, as we get more, we're introducing more media every day with the technologies that we have. And so that thing, they can snowball. So
Right.
the detriments are exponential.
Now, I know that you probably will disagree with this premise of the question, but I mean, how can society balance collective good with a commitment to individual rights?
I'm so I don't know. I don't know. I guess I would disagree with the premise a little bit, but because I don't think that you have to balance. I think it's in your personal interest for you to cooperate with certain people when you need to cooperate with them. It's in your personal interest to, interact with a good family. I mean, there's a benefit, there's a payoff. So I don't necessarily think that you have to make a balance as long as you're making these conscious choices to you know, water these relationships, nurture these relationships, only engage in these relationships when they serve you. I don't see a detriment. I don't see a choice to be had. I just think that this is a different perspective. And that's what I try to bring out in the book. Not much would change on the surface except for the way that you go about your life. You would go about your life more intentionally. It wouldn't be just the group of people I'm around. It would be the people who I share values with that I consciously want to, engage with and be around. It wouldn't just be, oh, I guess this is my circumstance. No, you create your circumstance. This is what you do. This is your job. This is what your meaning is. That's what I'm saying. So,
and how do we foster this individualistic approach? I mean, what would you change about our educational system?
wow, so interesting. So I guess for me, I try to approach it from a moral standpoint, and I guess I would present something that, like Rand spoke about, like even with Montessori schools. And I don't have a specific approach myself. I think the people who are experts in those fields, when they get a direction, they can actually take that direction and apply it better maybe than I can, or come up with the ways to apply it better than I can. But just the whole idea of, just starting with your perceptions, how the world works, having your understanding of how the world works and developing your mind from that point, into actually saying, hey, you have perceptions, and then you have then there's a conceptual world where kind of consolidate these things within an ideological framework, which sometimes I guess I would say it's a little bit technical, and there are people who can explain this better than I can, but that's how I would approach it. Just always looking at things, taking what you see and what you experience, and just having an understanding of concepts and percepts from an individualistic standpoint.
Why would you say that it's important to defend individualism intellectually rather than through like tradition or religion?
Because I think when I say well, it's not when I think. When I say individualism, I'm saying it from a psychological individual. So this is another point that Jung brings into play, because from him, one of his ideas is that if a person doesn't develop their individuality, then they are not a psychological individual. They are just a collective unconscious, a collective of unconsciousness. I think that's what he says. Might be misstating it right now, but so I approach it from that standpoint, and really what I'm saying is that I want to be clear that when I talk about people and when I talk about leadership for America in the book, it's somewhat from two different perspectives. Because when I'm talking about people, I'm talking about it with respect to people and their differences and what people may perceive as pluralism and things like that. But when I'm talking about leadership, to me in this country, we need consistent intellectual leadership that would govern for a country that's filled with these alternative or alternate, views of reality. Not this, I'm not trying to validate them. I'm just saying that we need a specific kind of leadership, and that has to be intellectual leadership, because it's the only leadership that can give a cohesive, consistent case and foundation for our goals, as far as setting the foundation of individualism and how things could fit together. So there couldn't, in my opinion, there's not another way to approach that goal.
Okay, and how does individualism shape the foundational principles of American identity?
I mean, I think it's just about what's the saying? The pursuit of wow, I'm missing it.
The pers-
Happiness.
Liberty and right.
Right, exactly. I'm blanking on it right now, but I think that's embedded in it from the beginning. And so one of the things that I took from Rand as well is that, and I think I state this in the book, is that what she did was just articulate what was in America's founding principles in in an intellectual manner and articulate it explicitly and state exactly what was unstated before. So it was already there. It's just that no one, in my opinion, till she stated it, said it in an intellectual manner, in a cohesive manner, to you know to to present it where people can understand it correctly.
What would you say some practical steps would be that leaders can take to reaffirm individualism in policymaking?
Hmm. Um, I mean, I think the first step is just to explicitly make to put that as the mission statement, because it's more of an ideal that keeps sets the boundaries, it's the guideline to where you want to go. Um, and for me, I don't want to be too much of a spoiler, but as if when you read my book, my focus becomes the Congress, um, specifically Senate in a way, because I see that there are aspects of Congress that are, regardless if they are or not, but that area of our society is those are our intellectual guard dogs. And what happens there is important for where we, our ideas and where they go from there. So to kind of give a little bit of a teaser, that's where I would start in Congress, in the legislative branch specifically. Um, and I make very clear distinctions in the book between legislative duties and executive duties and judicial duties, and why I have a certain approach on the legislative branch of
Right.
government.
And can you give some examples from American history that highlight the success of individual focused policies?
I mean, wow. I think that's, I just would say America, in my opinion. Um, I think the fact that, I think the fact that we had the flourishing in the beginning, say for, I know people want to like to muddy it with, the slavery issue, which is definitely an issue that needed to be addressed, but was, um, and even with that, like I would take a case I even spoke about, like Booker T. Washington in the book, just his approach to life. This, let me do the best that I can. Let me pursue my goals. Let me, live a fulfilling life or pursue a fulfilling life. Is the it's the fuel. It's everything. It's everything when it comes to meaning. Without those ideas, you you're really not experiencing the same kind of life that I am experiencing. You know, you're these are, and I understand that they are conceptions, but this is what we've come up with. So to answer your question simply, I think America in itself is that full idea is what we have is an example of an individualistic approach, and why we're here talking on on this show.
How does your book address critics who might say that individualism is inherently selfish?
I mean, it is inherently selfish, but I don't know why we put a negative connotation on selfishness. Um, I think there's a difference between rational selfishness and what some people may call rugged or rational individualism, or rational selfishness, or what some people might call rugged selfishness or rugged individualism. And I think Jung, I forgot what he calls it, but or I think he called it ruthless egoism or something like that. Um, but there's nothing wrong with being selfish. Your relationships, you should be selfish about your relationships, and they should mean something to you. Take, you should pursue relationships that you want. You should pursue your goals in life. I don't understand what's wrong with that. What's the counter to that argument? Could you enlighten me a
Well,
little bit?
okay, so let's say that you're a wealthy individual who is purely intent on the pursuit of profits, and you pollute the town that you are based in. That kind of selfishness hurts the whole of society.
So I think I'm glad that you brought that up, because in my mind, if you've polluted something, there was a wrong committed, right? And so I'm hoping that we have a law that would, you know, that would deter you from damaging people. And so there's some type of recourse that we can, go and pursue someone who does something like that. But I guess what pops out immediately in my mind is a lot of people who are, stoking this division and polarization within our, especially in the government sphere. Those are the people who can maybe speak for those groups of people who, like, maybe you say, like, this might be, and I'm kind of giving you a straw man argument, if you don't mind.
That's okay.
This might be the groups of people you say that can't speak up for themselves, right? And so to me, that's an area of society where there's a mediator or intermediary between the groups that can't speak up for themselves, that may have been wronged, and can bring criminal charges to someone who is deliberately or incorrectly polluting or something like that in this hypothetical situation. But I mean, this is not a government. This is not a government position. This is a position that somebody fulfills in the private sector and can pursue their purpose or profits if they want to. I'm hoping to assume that they're going for profits as well, but they can pursue their meaning by facilitating that action that needs to happen between these two groups of people.
So when you talk about individualism, you're not talking about the kind of individualism that is pure selfish based, where it's harming other people to accomplish your goals. You're talking about pursuing something that is mutually beneficial to you and society because of your individualistic approach, because you're doing
Right.
what's in your best interest.
For me, yes. I mean, because I don't see any benefit in just intentionally upsetting my neighbor, or wronging, doing a wrong to my neighbor or family,
Right.
or because that wouldn't be rational. How does it serve me? How would that
Right.
serve me is the question.
Well, for some people, I mean, we do have psychopaths in the
I mean,
world.
that's true. That's true. And for me, people should get the results that the results of their decisions, the consequences for their decisions. So if you alienate yourself, or if you engage in activities that alienate yourself, or make decisions that alienate yourself, and you don't get the benefits that you would with the cooperative group around you. And so, but to me, that speaks to the whole individualism piece, because then you experience the negative effects of your behavior. See, if we just have these rules that just force everybody to be the same without actually understanding the consequences of their decisions, then they can just walk around and just say, well, somebody else has absorbed the issue. But when you have to actually endure the negative results yourself, then you could say, oh, I had this experience. And maybe they may not get it, but you would say, I took this action, I made this decision, it came back with this experience. I'm not getting the results that I want. It's time to go back to the drawing board and develop my understanding as an individual. And then
Right.
that's something that each person can do as opposed to trying to do that on a collective scale, it doesn't work that way. Everybody needs to be handle their own spot, and then we can, have a better system that works together.
Some of the examples that you use in the book, you use one example of somebody who is gay, who
Sure.
comes from a conservative family in a conservative, town, for lack of a better word,
Yeah.
who hinders who they really are,
Right.
because of the collective mindset that is exhibited around them.
Right.
You also talk about a transgender person, same circumstance, and you make the argument that selfishness is in their best interest in being who they are, without
Right.
regard for what other people, the collective, think that happens to exist around them. And I found that
Sure.
argument to be very compelling, actually.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it works both ways. You know, you, I always want people to be authentic to themselves, and we have laws. Hopefully, they're good laws. And as long as you don't transgress these laws, be yourself. We may or may not be friends. I may not. You may not be somebody I want to hang around, but it doesn't mean that I don't want you to be who you are, because I don't see how that benefits me from deterring you from fulfilling whoever you want to be. It doesn't
Right.
benefit me in any way.
So I guess I want to ask you, how do you define the relationship between consciousness and moral authority?
Consciousness and moral authority. Interesting. So, so I guess the way that I use moral authority in the book is from a leadership standpoint, because we are in a country, and that means by definition, well, in America, it's more than one person. Somebody has to set the standard. Now, everybody may not agree, but my point is that you can't debate this. This is not debatable. And to me, establishing, and so part of me using the psychological aspect is just to try to look at it from an intellectual point of view to say, even if you believe in these collective ideals, you're really just projecting your inside outward. So it all comes from you anyway. So since it all comes from the individual, let's just call it what it is. It's an individual's perspective on everything. And if we just look at everybody as individuals and valorize the individual, excuse me, from I guess an individual in abstract and not groups, then that's a foundation that we can set. But that 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 would take for that we would be making it up. We would be saying that this is what we want. This is the choice that we are making, a fundamental choice. It's not a law. I mean, it may be in line with universal truth, but it's not necessarily something that, you know, it's something that we would make up, and it would be a position that we take to operate on, a foundation to operate on. So that's what I just meant about moral authority. It's just like, yeah, we're making a choice. This is the choice that we're making, and we're moving on. And we're not debating this. Are we going to be collectivists or individualists? If I'm in that position, I'm saying we're going to be individualists, and I'm not hearing collective arguments at all. I'm not even taking those arguments. And I just think the way that relates to just consciousness is because consciousness is individual. It all works together, just because, like I said, even though you may have a belief that you fall into an identity, a collective identity, that still is just your cognition entertaining these collective or social ideas and identifying yourself in those ideas.
Right. So it sounds like you're talking about. Okay, well, put it this way: why is intellectual clarity essential for establishing moral standards?
Excuse me. Intellectual clarity essential. Because we don't have any other way. We have to think with ideas. The only way that we could come up with philosophy or any understanding of anything is with ideas. And so you need intellectual clarity. And a feeling, as much as it's a part of our existence, doesn't facilitate that cohesive. It doesn't allow you to, I don't know, maneuver reality in that way from a philosophical standpoint. And so I think there's no other way, or I wouldn't say there's no other way. There's no better way for us to navigate than from an intellectual standpoint to bring to to have a conceptual cohesiveness and integrated view of life.
So, what role does emotional intelligence play in shaping moral standards?
So so emotional intelligence is one of these things that kind of I get a little confused about it because I just think that when I hear emotional intelligence, I hear four different things. I hear, do I understand the emotions of people around me, or do I understand my own emotions, which is
Right.
to me two different things. And then I also deal with this other part where, okay, am I going to do something about it, or am I not going to do something about it? Which makes to me takes the idea into four different areas. And when I say that, I'm just saying that there may be I may have an understanding of other people's emotions, but I may make a decision to say, well, I don't feel like I want to do something about that. The emotions in the room are off, and I understand that this is what this person wants from me, but I don't. That's not something that I want to do, or I may want to do it. So it's just that whole idea in itself is kind of too cluttered, in my opinion. But I do think that when you've practiced a life of approaching things as an individual, because you're flexing this muscle every day, and you're dealing with people. I mean, I'm assuming that you're dealing with people. That's going to increase your ability and strengthen your muscle of dealing with people when you have to deal with the consequences of their reactions. And then there's some other things that some other ideas, some other philosophies that probably can help people understand other people more. But just flexing that muscle every day is always going to be more, it's always going to be better than us just assuming that we know the answer. Just dealing
Right.
with people and saying, oh, I like them, or, you know, kindness for kindness sake. That's one of the things that I addressed in the book. It's like it doesn't help us. Kindness is for a reason. We exhibit kindness for a reason, and when kindness doesn't help us, we don't. It's not something that we want to pursue just because. So that's that part really.
How do political leaders' unconscious biases impact their ethical decision making? And can you give an example of how you've seen that kind of play out in recent history?
So political leaders' unconscious biases. Can you repeat the question one more time, please?
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
it's just like how do the political leaders' unconscious biases impact their ethical decision making?
Oh, I mean, so excuse me. I think everybody has biases.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
So I don't know that it's maybe I do. Do I agree with the premise of the question? I don't know because it's something that's assumed for me. We all have these biases, and so I think I have a right to my bias.
Right.
And I just think so. This is the reason why we need principles, and this is the reason why we need explicit principles, because I need to be able to judge it based upon that principle. I don't want to judge it because this person may have this bias. I want to judge it on some explicit means, this objective means or objective principle to say, hey, if you transgress or if you cross this line or this threshold, then that's wrong. I don't like getting into the whole idea of understanding people's unconscious biases. I mean, even Jung speaks about this. Like, you shouldn't really look to try to, understand a person's what he calls shadow. And there's actually a chapter, a section in the book where I talk about this the psychology of psychologizing, where both Rand and Jung, because the whole key to the book is that I use both of their arguments and juxtapose them together to show the similarities and the overlap. Is that both of them say you should what we're judging is a person's conscious decisions and conscious actions, and I can't really get into their unconscious and something that you think you may see in another person may be true or may not be true. So let's just limit it to what we know or what we're intentionally doing and what we can actually prove instead of getting into
Right.
to subconscious biases.
Well, can you explain the connection between critical thinking and principled leadership?
Wow. Okay. So I don't really use critical thinking so much in my book. But principled leadership is just, for me, it's about explicitly abiding by an objective principle. It's about not thinking everything is, unspoken, where the goalposts can move. So it's very much about objectivity for me, principled leadership. Um, and that's something that's even with the moral authority piece. It's about laying out explicitly what I want. Whereas though, I guess sometimes I encounter people, I've seen arguments or political arguments where people don't say exactly what they want. And many times I find that to be, you know, disingenuous. Because when you don't say exactly what you want, it means it could be anything. And it's a ploy, in my opinion. So I'm just saying that with principled leadership, it should just be something that's objective, a standard that we set, and that's something that we can use to measure if something is good or bad. It's similar to, excuse me, scientific method, in my opinion, because it's something that we can put out there as a standard, and we can measure, and anybody can come and measure and say, well, does this decision transgress this threshold, or does it go across here, goes across that, and we can measure it objectively without having our unconscious biases coming into play so much.
Right. So I'm curious, how do you reconcile subjective moral values with the need for universal principles?
Subjective moral values. So I don't know if that. I'll start this off like this. I am not a philosopher, and I probably would have a conversation with someone who is to even bring up questions about that. But I don't think that there's much of a conflict as far as the individual. Like I, universal truths or universal principles. I don't really know how I would answer that question. It's just that it's that for me, this is something that is not that difficult, but I can understand how people could possibly, have different opinions on, you know, universal principles. And I guess you could agree or disagree, but I guess the result is really going to tell us which one was right.
Right.
So I don't really have a whole lot to offer on that question,
Okay.
to be honest with
Fair
you.
enough. So, given today's political climate, how can leaders possibly promote individual autonomy in a system that often rewards and demands conformity?
Wow, I think that's the question that we've been trying to answer for years. um, I mean, to me, this is this is the benefit and the power of leadership, because I do, even from an individualistic standpoint. I was just talking with a person that I do another show with. It's interesting to say that we, or I'm pursuing a principle of individualism, but to say leaders change everything, because they do they set the pathway, they set the tone for how we go about things, and they can create. I guess I'm losing the word that I'm trying to think for. But they just create an atmosphere where it just changes the whole idea of the way that everyone in the room sees something. And
Right.
so I think that that's the important part of leadership, and I think that that's why when we have leaders, sometimes they're just putting in what they think is right in place. And so if I were to encounter a leader that puts individualism in place, then that would be a leader that I would want to follow. If they're having principled leadership, that would be a leader that I would want to follow. Even myself, if I found myself in a position like that, I would operate on these same principles and then try to, lead others and just, have the benefits, I guess I wouldn't say fall down, but they just set the tone. I guess I'll leave it at that. Sorry.
No, that's fine. So, well, what reforms would you suggest to emphasize personal responsibility in government?
What reforms? I mean, so many of the ones that we spoke about today, when we're talking about things like entitlement programs, because I don't think it develops individuals into better people, and that's not the reason. I think the reason you shouldn't do it is because it's immoral, because you're coercing and forcing other people to take their life and their resources to pay for things that they don't have a personal connection to. So that's just one entitlement programs like that. What is another one? I mean, any opportunity that we can find to put responsibility back onto the person who's engaging in the actions. And I think that could be done everywhere. And it's not, like I said, it's not because I'm trying to achieve a specific goal. It's because that's the right thing to do. It's the moral thing to do. And the consequences are the consequences. So any area where I can just say, another one I can think of is just like, limits on 401ks. Like, wow, who came up with this number that I can contribute to a 401k? Like, where does that number come from? Why can't I contribute more? Why can I not if I'm in a certain place in life or whatever? Or I guess there are opportunities where you cannot do it, but somebody might put a limit on it where you can do it, but to so much. So it's just all of these different things where you're treating people like children. And so when you treat people like children, I'm not going to be surprised that they grow up to be adult children, And so we want to facilitate in every area of life. We want to facilitate more and more individuals, make more choices, and do more things. And I guess one thing analogy I'll use, I don't know if you ever seen The Never Ending Story. So for me,
Yeah.
So yeah, it's one of my favorite stories. And I always ask people, I guess, do you remember the villain in the story, in The Never Ending Story?
God, it's been so long since I've seen that. I don't.
Okay. Yeah. So, but I guess a lot of people would think it's a big cat or whatever. But no, the villain in The Never Ending Story is the nothing. It's when people don't have dreams, don't have aspirations, don't have things that they're pursuing. That's what's destroying the world. When people don't have anything to pursue, they don't have any purpose, they don't have any reasons, they don't have any meaning. And so when you keep taking these small things, it could be anything, small little responsibilities from them, they don't have any stuff to shape their life into. They don't have anything to do. And I know it seems so like not as serious to many people, but these little things are what is actually what creates a life. It creates the momentum of life, the activities of life, and developing meaning and things of that nature. So any place that you can find an opportunity to give the person the responsibility that's due to them, that's related to their actions, not other people's actions.
So, how can communities support individual autonomy while also maintaining social cohesion?
Communities. Once again, this is a psychological thing. I don't think that there's a real trade-off on this. This is just, instead of me doing what I think I'm supposed to do based upon unwritten rules laid out by the group, I am consciously choosing the people who I want to be with, the decisions I want to make. Is there a charity that I believe in that I want to contribute to? Do they? One of the things, I guess, when I remember hearing a story about Robin Hood Foundation before, and it was just this. It kind of inspired me. It was very intentional. It was very run like a business and things like that. And so for me, I just want to always have that conscious intentionality when dealing with anyone, anything, any idea. It's not a trade-off. It's I don't even know if it would seem that different to many people, but it's just always understanding that no, I don't have to do any of these things. I don't have to be with this person if I don't want to. I don't have to contribute um, to this charity that you think that I should contribute to. I think I see the value over here in this charity, and this is the one that I want to, the person or people I want to interact with. And just years and years of making those decisions, those conscious decisions, it builds you up and you become a strong intellectual, or more psychological individual.
Right. No, I would agree with that. So can you give is the United States is it a specific example of individualism? Would you say the United States, or are there other countries that exhibit some of those traits as well?
That's not something that I've researched in my book. I specifically centered on the United States. I think because it's so unique, I guess I look at the results as well. But I think I don't know if I can't say that I know enough about other countries to actually answer that question. I just spoke specifically about America and what the foundation was, and how us getting away from that foundation of individualism destroys us every time that we try to even attempt it. So
When do you think America really kind of separated itself from this individualistic approach that you're talking about?
so I guess for me, maybe the 20s, late, maybe 1918, 1920, early 20s in that area. And the reason why I say that is because as a financial professional, I know, you're really starting to get into depression. You're starting to get the Federal Reserve and those things like that, where we're trying to collectively maintain a job rate, and then we start getting into the FDR a little later than that. So it's just, to me, it's crept on and on and on. But specifically in maybe like 1910s to 1920, seems like my understanding of history is when you start seeing these ideas of, okay, maybe there's a little bit more. Maybe we can collectivize a little bit more. Maybe we can put the, like I said, Federal Reserve together. Maybe we can put the Great New Deal in and have these other programs. And so it snowballs, and it's snowballing. And in my opinion, what you see is that you see a culture that you see right now where it's like, well, people never fully had to develop themselves. And so therefore they, they're not as good as they should be. So
My producer has a question. What if citizens are allowed to choose where and how their tax dollars are used? Could a system like that work?
So choice is always good. So one thing I'm always going to advocate for choice, but to me, tax dollars in itself doesn't indicate choice. It's like, well, we're already going to take the money, so you just tell me where to put it. And so I don't advocate for non-choices. It's not really a word, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But I'm always up for maybe technology can help solve this problem. It's not. I don't know if I would say it's a problem, but yes, there are services that like I said before, would want to contribute to financially to make sure that we keep these services. Defensive borders. Defense of me. I need somebody intrudes into my house. I would like to call the police, and I'm not one of these people who want to necessarily defund it or anything like that. But yeah, I think it's kind of a trick question. Yeah, you get to choose, but they already took the money, so big deal.
Yeah. But what if there were a system where people could choose where their tax dollars are used? For instance, you could decide whether or not you want to fund Medicare or Social Security or the military or something of that nature.
I would say that it's a good step. It's a step in the right direction. Do I think that it's a good end goal? I think there probably is something better than that. But do I think it's better than now? Yes, I think it's better than now. That's my
And apparently,
answer.
Crusade America is asking, how can I, as an individual, choose to support a specific program unless that program exists? Only the super wealthy can create their own programs.
Who said the super wealthy is the only people who can create their own program? People create programs all the. I don't understand the question, because I create programs. I created businesses myself, and I'm not super wealthy. You created this program. I don't know if you're super wealthy.
No, not,
Just
not even
so,
close.
so yeah. So pursue your own meaning. It's not. One thing I also just really quick would like to say is I know we got into this thing where everybody's about wealth and about how much money you make. I don't really understand these arguments. Pursue your meaning. Pursue your meaning, and it's nothing wrong with pursuing profit, but do something that benefits you and gives you happiness and hopefully profits as well. But that's you're supposed to be pursuing happiness and fulfillment. So go do that, regardless.
Yeah. So we're almost out of time here. I want to talk more about your book. Who is the book really for? What is the intended audience?
So I guess conceptual thinkers, people deeply concerned about morality, and people who feel like there was something going wrong in the country, but they just couldn't put their finger on it. I think, enough, I'm really trying to make an intellectual argument to people who have a sense of meaning and what's going on, and and I and I didn't want to make it a religious argument. It's because I think religious tones come across in what I'm saying, and that's my assumption or belief. But I'm not making a religious argument. I'm just trying to make a philosophical argument based on psychology and philosophy. And so, and the whole idea of meaning being something that we make up is just, I'm just trying to articulate that point to say, yes, that is true. So let's make good meaning. Let's make up good meaning. So those are the people who I really want to reach out to.
And again, the book, for those that are just tuning in, is America's Ethical Archetype, Establishing the Psychology of Moral Authority and Correcting Our Country's Broken Politics. And I'm talking with Damien Dubose, the author of the book. And, I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure that this audience is going to be receptive to this book.
Okay.
But I want to say to my audience, as they say often, an open mind is the most important thing that you can have. And this book really challenges a lot of assumptions that I had. It made me think, it made me question where I stand on a lot of issues. And this is exactly the type of book that I think that my audience should listen to, should pick up. And I really appreciate the fact that you wrote this, and I really appreciate the fact that you were willing to come on a show that is, in many ways in disagreement with the the principles of individualism. I mean, we're very much a collective thinking show here. So I want to thank you for coming on the show, and I wanted to kind of give you a few moments just to give you your last words, and kind of free talk, if you will.
No, thank you for having me, Sean. I really appreciate it. I appreciate you actually reading the book, going through it, and you giving me the opportunity to challenge your ideas through reading my book. So I really appreciate that. I think it's just, for me, like I said, there's, on the heels of this election that we've just had, I think
Yeah.
we've had a shift in tone a bit, and I think that there's a lot of avenue or a lot of room to do some fixing over the next years in terms of politics. So I want to try to change the conversation, and I want to come at it from an intellectual standpoint, and I just want people to please just engage like you engaged, and I hope that you will understand that I am trying to, present an argument that and a foundational principled argument. So
Right. Well, we're all trying. Our goals are all connected in terms of making this country a better place for everyone.
right,
And
always
exactly. And the question is, how do we do that? And
right,
the answer is not picking one side over the other. The answer is debating, having conversations, listening more than talking.
I mean,
And go
I
ahead.
agree. No, I'm enjoying this conversation myself. It's just that, like you said, we may or may not agree, but I don't think that we disagree as much as some others may believe.
Right.
But yeah, and
No,
I think
I,
that's what comes out in talking. By having these conversations, you just know, you start to understand. No, I really don't disagree with my neighbor as much as I thought that I did.
yeah, nor do you hate them the way that you're supposed to
No,
hate them in this
right?
culture.
Yeah, I
Well,
don't know where that came from.
I want to talk a little bit really quickly about the election that we just had. Um,
Okay.
Very divisive election. Although it seems like every election is getting more and more divisive. I mean, again, as I guess I hate the word liberal because I'm not a big fan of liberals, to
Okay.
be quite honest. But I mean, I'm on the left of the political spectrum for sure.
Got it.
And what really irritated me was this talk from the so-called left, the Democratic Party, about Donald Trump's a fascist. Donald Trump's going to destroy the country. All of this rhetoric, and I'm not a fan of Donald Trump by any stretch of the imagination.
Got it.
But I don't think that kind of talk is helpful. Would you agree that's just unconducive to where we need to be as a nation?
Yeah, I don't think it was helpful, but I don't know if I think much of it was helpful on either side, right? But
Well, right.
it just it became to the point. It was like the boy who cried wolf in a sense, so in some ways, because it seems so empty. Because if I thought someone was a fascist and a dictator, I wouldn't just play nice with them as soon as they won an election,
Thank you.
you know. So
Thank you.
if I
Yes.
really thought they were a fascist and a dictator, there would be some other things that I probably would think of first than shaking their hand and agreeing with them on things. But yeah, I don't think that that's something that we should pursue. But one of my things is just that the way that we've engaged the voter, and maybe this might be a result of the voter not. I think they treat voters like children,
Yes.
and I think
Absolutely.
that they think that they can just cater or play to a voter's emotion without even having substance, intellectual substance in what they're saying. And in some ways, I think that pursuit backfired on them. But I don't think that it backfired on them because people took an intellectual principle stance. I think it backfired on them because people took a more traditional stance, and I don't think that that's bad. That's much better. So
Yeah.
that's my input on that one.
Well, Damien, thank you so much for coming on the show. I'd love to have you back at some point. This is an amazing book.
Thank you.
It's a long book. It's very in depth. It's very intellectual and philosophical. If we can put the cover up one more time for those that are watching,
Thank you.
America's Ethical Archetype. Again, establishing the psychology of moral authority and correcting our country's broken politics. And I think that everyone can agree that our country's politics are, in fact, broken and in need of repair or replacement, if nothing else. Damien, thanks again for coming on the show. I love the book.
Thank you.
Do you have any plans to write another book?
No, not immediately, but I can see myself maybe getting around to it. Maybe paring down the ideas a bit and getting a little more acute on how to apply. But
Oh,
thank you. Appreciate it, Sean. Thank you.
thank you so much. And this has been Crusade America. We will see you next year.